and welcome to Intro 101. My name is Chris and I am your neuroscience and psychology graduate student assistant. I'm here to assist you with the related science basics that you interact with on a daily basis so that you can start or continue to build a foundation in human biology and physiology. My hope is that I can help you better engage with the information you consume from your favorite health and wellness educators and influencers. Much like the way a graduate assistant helps prepare intro students so they can better engage with the lectures delivered by their professors. Or maybe you're here because you just like a better idea of what's happening inside your skin suit. Either way, grab a beverage of choice and stick with me for the next many minutes. Today's episode is Intro to the Nervous System 101. We'll take a bird's eye look at the nervous system and its subdivisions, what role it plays in your health and wellness, and for homework, I'll introduce you to scientists whose research involves various aspects of the nervous system. In upcoming episodes, we will take a more detailed dive into the physiology of specific parts of the nervous system. Before we start, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge with much gratitude that Intro 101 is recorded on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Kwantlen, Kaitsi, Matsqui, and Semiahmoo First Nations. Additionally, we here at Intro 101 believe wholeheartedly that science is for everybody. In fact, the richness, complexity, and strength of scientific research is astronomically improved by the inclusion of many varied voices. In an effort to help everybody have access to education, research resources, and representation across scientific fields the world over, I will be sharing a few organizations in the show notes that are working hard to promote and grant access to STEM education around the world. Please check them out, and if you are able, please support them in any way that you can. You can donate and share their work on your social media networks, or maybe volunteer your time to help them as needed. If you already generate opportunities that provide access to STEM education and resources within your own communities, or support other STEM education organizations not listed here, please share them in the comments below if you'd like others to contribute as they are able. All right, welcome to class. Let's crack on with the Nervous System 101. So, what is the nervous system and why do we need to know about it? As mentioned in the previous episode, the nervous system is one of 11 body systems that work together to bring balance or homeostasis to our bodies. All of our body systems are important and work together to keep us alive and functioning. But the nervous system in particular is one of two regulatory body systems. The endocrine system is the other. The nervous system is composed of the organs responsible for thinking, feeling, sensing, and initiating movement or action in order to respond to external or internal stimuli. It is a key player in our mental and physical well-being. There likely isn't a health and wellness protocol in existence that doesn't involve participation from the nervous system. So understanding how our nervous system works will go a long way to understanding how our bodies move and function, why we behave the way we do, and why we feel the way we do about ourselves and the world around us. I will try to show you over the course of this series that each of these things has a physiological basis that is working to bring our bodies and minds into balance. So definitely a system we should get acquainted with to maintain or optimize both our physical and mental well-being. Okay, so what does the nervous system look like? Well, the nervous system, in a nutshell, is your brain, spinal cord, and nerves. As briefly mentioned in the last episode, the nervous system tissue is made up of particular types of cells. The ones we hear about the most are neurons. Neurons are special cells because they send and receive electrical impulses signaling to body and brain parts to take action. There are many different kinds of neurons throughout the nervous system, and they have specific functions. There are also other very important types of cells that support neurons and keep them operating as they should, or sometimes trigger their demise, and not always for nefarious reasons. But in upcoming episodes, we'll get to know the physiology of neurons and other nervous system cells. Today, we'll just do the overview of the nervous system. So the nervous system is subdivided into two main systems: the central nervous system, often abbreviated to CNS, and the second is peripheral nervous system, or PNS. For the sake of clarity, I will not be abbreviating these systems in this episode, but you may see or hear of them in their abbreviated forms elsewhere along your health education trajectory. Okay, so for the central nervous system, this consists of brain and spinal cord. It both receives and sends signals by way of many different kinds of neurons. We'll spend numerous episodes on the brain and spinal cord, but for now know that the central nervous system, as you can imagine considering the organs it recruits, is an important part of the nervous system. It plays a pivotal role in homeostasis because it is command central. If you remember from last episode, homeostasis is largely achieved through the negative feedback loops, and negative feedback loops need sensors, controllers, and effectors. Within the central nervous system, you'll find many sensors and controllers. It mainly receives and deciphers information, decides which actions to take, and directs the body to do so by recruiting effectors to do some kind of business. The peripheral nervous system is mainly neurons and their fibers, which are also called axons, and other nervous system cells that branch out from the brain and spinal cord to the rest of the body. These are also sometimes called nerve cells and nerve fibers. The peripheral nervous system is further subdivided into two subsystems, the somatic and autonomic nervous systems. The autonomic nervous system is then subdivided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, and possibly the enteric nervous system. There seems to be some differing opinions among physiologists as to whether the enteric nervous system should be part of the autonomic nervous system or if it's its own standalone system. But for now, we'll leave it under autonomic jurisdiction. Okay, so that's a lot of subdivisions, and it's about to get a little muddier, but hang in there. I'll do my best to walk you through it. So, two very important words come up when discussing the nervous system, and they are afferent and efferent, and they refer to the directions in which signals are sent between the peripheral and central nervous systems. So, signals again are those neuron-to-neuron electrical pulses. Afferent refers to a type of messenger neuron that sends signals toward the central nervous system from the body's periphery. This is also sometimes called input, and those neurons can also be called sensory nerves. Your central nervous system, so again your brain and spinal cord, receives input from afferent neurons or sensory nerves in the periphery and processes that information and decides what action to take. Efferent refers to messenger neurons that send signals from the central nervous system back to the periphery. This is sometimes called output, and those neurons are also called motor neurons. So once the central nervous system has processed the afferent information or sensory input, it will send output signals via the efferent or motor neurons back to the periphery, instructing the body to respond to whatever caused the afferent neurons to send input in the first place. So that's a lot of words that sound the same, so let's put this into context. Say your hand brushes against something sharp. The nerve endings of your peripheral afferent sensory nerves in your hand sense the sharpness and shoot this information to the central nervous system. The central nervous system receives this input and processes it. It recognizes pain and potential danger and thus sends output signals to the hand by the way of efferent motor neurons to pull the hand away from the sharp object. The exact process is significantly more intricate and complex, and we'll get there in a future episode. But for now, afferent means sensory nerves send input to the central nervous system for processing, and efferent means the central nervous system sends output signals to the body's periphery by way of efferent motor neurons telling the body to take action. So put a pin in that because it will likely come up again throughout the series. But now let's take a brief tour through the subdivisions of the peripheral nervous system and their functions. Both of the peripheral nervous system subdivisions have afferent and efferent neurons. As mentioned, those two subdivisions are the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system is responsible for sensory and motor functions. Its two main gigs are processing sensory information from the external environment and connecting the central nervous system to the periphery to control muscles and reflexes. It's also sometimes referred to as the voluntary control system because it is involved with almost all voluntary muscle movements. The example of the hand reflexively pulling away from the sharp object is the somatic nervous system at work. Okay, so the second subdivision of the peripheral nervous system is the autonomic nervous system. This one is a doozy. I mean it. Press pause, fix a snack, get hydrated, have a stretch, breathe like Wim Hof. Wim Hof? Wim Hof. Wim Hof. Sorry, Wim. Whatever you need to ready yourself for some serious nervous system business. Okay, ready? First, if you did any of those things I suggested, you just engaged your autonomic nervous system. But let's back up a second. The autonomic nervous system is responsible for the regulation of involuntary or automatic processes like digestion, breathing, blood circulation, pupil dilation, sexual arousal, body temperature, and heart rate. Remember, the somatic nervous system regulates voluntary processes. The autonomic nervous system regulates involuntary processes. In this context, regulation is another way of referring to homeostasis. Regulatory function is keeping or bringing the body into balance. The autonomic nervous system is further subdivided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. And again, we'll throw in the enteric nervous system because most physiologists say so. So let's start with the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is a bunch of nerve cells and fibers that connects the central nervous system to organs in the periphery such as eyes, heart, lungs, liver, muscles. A caveat about the eyes. Portions of the eyes, like the optic nerve, are part of the central nervous system. But nerve fibers that innervate pupil dilation are part of the peripheral nervous system, the peripheral sympathetic nervous system. Not at all confusing, right? Anyway, one of the main functions of the sympathetic nervous system is to kick your body into gear to respond to an acute stressor. And it does this by gathering resources from energy stores in your body and sending them to muscles and other organs to prepare you to deal with a stressor in a fight, flight, or freeze manner. You have probably heard of the fight or flight response before. I'm pretty sure I mentioned it in the last episode if you watched that. That's this response. There's also fainting, fawning, and I think maybe even flopping. There are more Fs that were later added to this response, but we'll just refer to it as the fight or flight response for now. We'll revisit the stress response throughout this series and in future series, where we'll take a deeper look at what it looks like through the lens of psychological stressors, which I think is usually where fawning and some of the other Fs are more likely to occur. But for now, let's revisit the example from the last episode where an external stimulus, that snake on the trail, sets off a series of events in the body. You'll remember I mentioned one part of the nervous system dials down and another one activates. That's the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system decreases activity and the sympathetic nervous system increases activity. This is the fight or flight response, and this is what happens in the body. The moment you see or hear that maybe snake, your visual and or audition systems alert a tiny brain structure called the amygdala. We'll revisit this small but mighty brain structure in future episodes, but for now, know that this is emotion central, and at this moment it perceives danger, and its next move is to light a fire under the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is a brain structure that has a role in controlling endocrine hormone function. It is a hub from which the nervous system communicates to the rest of the body. It's the hypothalamus that activates the sympathetic nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system then recruits more endocrine glands by sending signals through its extensive nerve system. One of those glands is the adrenal gland, and it shoots epinephrine, also called adrenaline, into the bloodstream. So, just to be sure you're tracking, the amygdala senses danger, lights that fire under the hypothalamus shouts to the adrenal gland to start pumping adrenaline into the bloodstream. If we get this far into the stress response, this is the moment when it all kicks off in your body, like a fight scene in a Donnie Yen film. The heart pumps faster, increasing blood pressure and blood flow to muscles. Breathing becomes more rapid and tiny airways in your lungs get wider so more oxygen can get in and get to your brain because that makes you more alert. Your pupils dilate. Glucose stored in your organs rapidly become available so your whole body has energy to respond to that fight, flight, or freeze manner. And all of that, everything I just said, happens lightning fast. Like before you even have a chance to process what you're actually looking at or hearing. And that's just stage 1 of the fight or flight response. Stage 2 kicks in after that initial burst of epinephrine/adrenaline. This is when the brain takes a moment to evaluate what's happening. If it still perceives danger, the holy trinity of hormonal axes takes over. That's the hypothalamic-pituitary-adrenal axis, or HPA axis. In that moment, the hypothalamus doubles down and in epic wizardry fires out a hormone to the pituitary gland that causes the pituitary to release another hormone that rockets to the adrenal gland, and this time, the adrenal gland unleashes the kraken of all hormones, cortisol. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid hormone, and it is colossally important. It will keep your sympathetic nervous system engaged and on high alert and keep energy flooding your muscles and organs so you can keep fighting or running or freezing until you are safe. For short-term stressors, and short-term stressors, cortisol is your best friend. It even has a role in shutting itself off when enough of it is surging through your body. Think negative feedback loop here. Cortisol has a built-in negative feedback loop. When the body detects it has more than enough cortisol in its system, so beyond its set point, cortisol itself shuts off its own production by way of inhibiting the hormones that got it pumping in the first place. I know. I wasn't wrong about the subdivision of the nervous system being a doozy. Take a minute, hydrate, breathe, because there's more. If stress is chronic, meaning persistent and long-term, cortisol will keep cyclically kicking in, and too much cortisol for too long can have deleterious effects on its ability to shut itself off. When this happens, the HPA axis can become dysregulated, and we definitely don't want this. Persistent HPA axis dysregulation is present in neuropsychiatric disorders like clinical depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and anxiety. Its malfunction is also implicated in metabolic disorders like insulin sensitivity and obesity. When your sympathetic nervous system remains activated, it can deplete the body of its resources. This is when you start feeling fatigued and burnt out and start seeking out those protocols that help mitigate stress and bring your mind and body back to safety, back to homeostasis, hopefully. When the brain perceives the body is safe from the stressor, the sympathetic nervous system tag teams the parasympathetic nervous system, and the body shifts from fight or flight state to a rest and digest state. That is what the parasympathetic nervous system is also called. I've also heard it called the feed and breathe system, so already many clues as to what body systems the parasympathetic system supports. So what does the parasympathetic nervous system do? Well, immediately following the stressor, it kind of undoes everything that the sympathetic nervous system just blew up. It triggers the release of hormones that relax the body and redirect resources to store up energy and restore function to organs in the areas of the body that were put on hold while sympathetic nervous system organs were on alert. So as you probably already guessed, the parasympathetic nervous system supports digestion and sexual arousal, but it also aids in saliva production and crying, as well as the release of other bodily fluids and waste. It also slightly constricts airways when less oxygen is required by the body during rest states. It's probably a good idea at this point to just give you a quick recap and remind you that the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems are part of the autonomic nervous system, which is part of the peripheral nervous system. I say this to draw your attention back to what the peripheral nervous system is, and that is branches of afferent and efferent nerve cells, or neurons, and their fibers that transmit information from the periphery to the central nervous system, and from the central nervous system to muscles and glands and organs and get them to do things. And the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems are part of the efferent division of this larger peripheral autonomic nervous system. So that means they transmit information by way of efferent neuronal fibers from brain and spinal cord to muscles and glands. Talking about these systems in a siloed manner makes it easy to forget that they are all part of a grand regulatory system of nerve cell communication. So let's try to put these two subsystems in a homeostatic perspective. As explained in the previous episode and mentioned earlier in this episode, homeostasis is the constant monitoring of set points and the activation of negative feedback loops to maintain those set points. And remember, a negative feedback loop has sensors, a controller, and effectors. I know this is getting repetitive, but repetition helps with learning and memory. When an external or internal stimulus appears to threaten homeostasis, so we can look at that like an internal set point has been compromised. When that happens, the afferent neurons of the peripheral nervous system tell the central nervous system something is off. The central nervous system is the controller in this instance, more specifically the amygdala when we're talking about the stress response. The central nervous system then transmits signals by way of efferent neuronal fibers to innervate glands and muscles of the sympathetic nervous system to do their business to get back to homeostasis. So the muscles and glands are the effectors. The initial business is to activate the sympathetic nervous system to coordinate areas of the body responsible for spending energy until the stress has passed. And when it has passed, the central nervous system transmits signals by way of efferent neuronal fibers to the parasympathetic nervous system to organize and activate areas of the body responsible for storing energy and resting and whatever other business was put on hold while the body was dealing with that stressor. And it will do so until the body is back in balance. You may hear health experts discuss ways in which you can activate your parasympathetic nervous system as a way to attenuate your stress response or your sympathetic nervous system. And another way that's worded is autonomic regulation or self-regulation, sometimes emotional regulation. They're all mostly referring to the same outcome, and that is to calm yourself. One of the main anatomical components of the parasympathetic nervous system is the vagus nerve. It is a cranial nerve and the longest in the body. It also spreads to many parts of the body and impacts a number of organs. This is a very popular nerve among mental health and wellness advocates, many of whom claim that stimulating it will activate the parasympathetic nervous system and calm the stress response. It has been implicated in the attenuation of chronic inflammation as well. It's received so much attention in recent years that it probably warrants an episode devoted to what the research says about its physiology and if the stress relief claims are empirically validated. So we'll put a pin in it for now. Okay, so the last subsystem of the autonomic subsystem is the enteric nervous system. I won't spend much time on this system right now, but we will get to know it a little better in a future episode. What's important to know is that it is located in the gut. More accurately, it is a network of neurons, including motor neurons, in the walls of the gastrointestinal tract from the esophagus to the rectum. So it covers a lot of bodily real estate, and it can operate independently of the central nervous system. It does receive input and send output to the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, but it's mainly self-contained. It achieves this by reflexively activating digestive functions that involve the contraction and relaxation of the digestive tract, as well as the secretion of digestive fluids and absorption of nutrients into the digestive tract. Now, we already mentioned that the gut is modulated by the parasympathetic system, right? The rest and digest system. So what does the enteric system do that the parasympathetic does not? Well, it has more to do with the types of neurons involved and their functions that separate the two systems as far as digestive functions go. The enteric system has specific types of nerve cells in the gastrointestinal wall that act on their own reflexive rules, separate from parasympathetic influence. Those cells regulate muscle movement in the gut and monitor glandular functions that control mucus and secretion of gastric juices. Those neurons are part of a network that's different from the parasympathetic neuronal networks involved in digestion, though they communicate to each other and work alongside each other. Yeah, again, doozy. Let's just take a second to thank our autonomic nervous system for being automatic, because the sheer amount of admin it would take to voluntarily regulate it makes my palms sweat, which I believe is also an autonomic response. Okay, so let's do a quickish recap. The nervous system is made up of many types of cells. One of the most prominent in health and wellness discussions is neurons, and they fire electrical pulses around the brain and body, signaling it to take action. The nervous system is also subdivided into the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which is made up of nerve cells and their fibers that live outside of the brain and spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system is further subdivided into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Both have afferent and efferent neurons. Afferent neurons, also called sensory nerves, send input to the central nervous system for processing. Once that input has been processed, the central nervous system sends output to the rest of the body to respond by way of efferent or motor neurons. The somatic nervous system is responsible for sensory and voluntary motor functions. The autonomic nervous system is responsible for involuntary processes and is further subdivided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic and enteric nervous systems. The sympathetic nervous system activates in response to an acute stressor, and it does this by gathering resources from energy stores in your body and sending them to muscles and organs to prepare you to deal with a stressor in a fight, flight, or freeze manner. Your parasympathetic nervous system is your rest and digest system and comes back online after the stressor is mitigated. And lastly, your enteric nervous system is a particular set of neurons that reflectively activate digestive functions outside of the influence of the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems, but still in cahoots with them. Okay, so a final word about the sympathetic nervous system. Throughout my academic pursuits, I've heard more than one professor joke that they don't know why it's called sympathetic, because if it's kicking in, something disastrous is happening, which doesn't sound at all sympathetic. But I'd argue that the most sympathetic thing our bodies can do for us is support us in a moment of crisis. And that's what the sympathetic nervous system is doing. When that moment of crisis turns into continuous crisis, sure, the sympathetic nervous system feels less sympathetic because its perpetual engagement can lead to dysregulating our bodies. But even then, I'd argue that it's doing what it was designed to do, and that is to alert us to a persistent problem and divert resources to the organs most needed to get us away from that persistent problem. What's less sympathetic, in many instances, is when the evaluative part of our brain has been trained by years of sociocultural conditioning to keep us in situations our sympathetic nervous system is begging us to get away from. Conditioning that convinced us to distrust our bodies and gaslit us into believing those signals and our responses to them are irrational, which couldn't be farther from the truth. To joke that our sympathetic nervous system is not sympathetic feels like one more dog whistle that would suggest our body's highly conserved evolutionary response to survival isn't looking out for our best interests and shouldn't be trusted, when in fact it is indeed trying to alert us to get to safety, whatever that may look like for any individual's experience. Now, I don't think there was any ill intent on the part of my professors. More than likely, they heard the same thing from their professors. But if we keep repeating notions that undermine our bodily agency, even in jest, we risk perpetuating harmful narratives that keep people confused and afraid to listen to their own bodies. And even worse, could mindlessly contribute to supporting systemic beliefs that lead to carelessly dismissing cries for help from vulnerable populations in medical crises. Those systemic beliefs have long decided who is allowed to be heard and who is irrational. And no matter how intact and online the evaluative brain structures are in those vulnerable populations and how often they plead to be heard, the prevailing dismissive response would have these populations believe that their bodies are lying to them, or worse, that their bodies aren't worth listening to. And that is not sympathetic, especially when dismissing their pleas for help ruthlessly and relentlessly keeps these populations in dysregulated states. Now, if you've ever experienced being dismissed by medical professionals, family, or just anyone whom you needed to hear you or try to understand what you were experiencing in that moment, I'm very, very sorry that happened to you. It can feel incredibly disempowering. It was okay for you to listen to your body then, and it's okay to listen to your body now. For the rest of us, as I have yet to come across an autonomic regulation protocol that's designed to remove a lifetime of conditioning or the external stressors that puts bodies on high alert in the first place, I implore us all to consider our own contributions to someone else's stress. Based on what I've shared about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, what are some ways that we can recognize when someone else is experiencing stress or fear, and what can we do in that moment to be helpful and not make it worse, even if you can't understand why they're experiencing it? Remember, their bodies are trying to increase their oxygen intake, their muscles are preparing to take some kind of action, and their pupils may be dilating, though that can be a little harder to discern in the moment. So what might this look like in identifiable terms? Maybe rapid breathing, tense muscles, clenched jaw, rigid stance, mannerisms that indicate they're on high alert and are taking in their surroundings, like wide-eyed and hypervigilant. They may appear agitated, or they may get confrontational. They may appear to be shutting down, which can look like a sudden withdrawal from speaking or unable to find words, or they may be looking for a way to leave the room. How can we give someone experiencing any of those symptoms the space and safety they need so their own evaluative systems can kick in and assess the situation? How can we advocate for those who encounter persistent dismissive stressors so they can feel heard and have a minute to rest and digest? What can we do to be mindful to limit our own actions from activating someone else's fight or flight response, especially when they're already in a vulnerable state? The answers to these questions are going to be varied and individualistic. As I've mentioned before, what triggers our stress response is going to be different for all of us. What triggers it at one time may not trigger it again another time, because every human is incredibly complex and has layers on top of layers of factors contributing to how they will respond to any stimulus at any time. So maybe homework for this week could be taking note of our own and others' sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system activation in response to stressors, being mindful and attentive to our contributions to both. I should mention that the stress response plays out a little differently in children, as that evaluative part of their brain isn't fully developed until adulthood, but a lot of the somatic responses will be similar. The stress response can be even more nuanced in neurodivergent children and adults, as well as those with traumatic brain injury and other neurological disorders. We'll take a tour through the developing brain and address the physiology of the stress response in children later in this series, and we'll have a look at the intersection of stress and neurodiversity in a later series. For now, to help you get a broader understanding of the nervous system's role in the stress response, I recommend visiting the work of the neuroscientists and neurobiologists and psychologists who study the stress response. I'll get you started with a few here, and I'll post links to their work in the show notes below. First up is Dr. Ji-Hyun Kim. She is an associate professor of molecular psychiatry at Deakin University in Australia. Dr. Kim's research is really fascinating, Among her vast research repertoire are studies involving fear and anxiety extinction in adolescence, and looks at how overcoming fear memories in adolescence can prevent anxiety disorders later on in adulthood. Definitely worth checking out. Second, I highly recommend perusing the research of Dr. Alia Crum of Stanford University. Dr. Crum's research is like this brilliant buffet of really interesting ways to examine how our mindset contributes to how we approach many aspects of life, including stress, but also healthy eating, treatment side effects, emotions, and behavior. Relevant to today's episode is her research on how certain mindsets can actually harness the stress response to enhance performance and productivity. Third, another incredible contribution to research on the stress response and nervous system activation comes from Dr. Elon Meyer. Dr. Meyer is a psychiatric epidemiologist, which is someone who studies the causes of mental illness. He is Professor Emeritus at Columbia University and Distinguished Senior Scholar of UCLA's Williams Institute. He has conducted extensive research on minority identities and is known for developing the minority stress model. This model demonstrates how prejudice, discrimination, and stigma contribute to the health disparities among LGBTQ+ populations, and has been adapted by a wider swath of marginalized populations who experience persistent social stressors, including ethnic, disabled, and neurodivergent minorities. If you read nothing else this week, read his original paper on minority stress. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It is directly relevant to ways in which we contribute to another's stress experience, and it beautifully articulates what that stress response looks like and how it can become dysregulated, leading to poor health outcomes for vulnerable people. Lastly, the prolific and incredibly important work of Dr. Velma McBride Murray is most worthy of your attention. Dr. McBride Murray is a psychologist and sociologist and holds 2 highly distinguished titles at Vanderbilt University. Her research has enhanced our understanding of how environmental factors, including systemic racism, can impede parenting and safeguarding youth in African American populations. She developed 2 successful family-based interventions that are designed to help parents teach their kids protective factors like self-regulation in the midst of persistent systemic environmental stressors. Part of self-regulation is autonomic regulation, so remember your autonomic nervous system is the negative feedback loop between your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Dr. McBride Murray is doing such amazing things in this world that she was recognized with a presidential citation for her outstanding contributions to research. If you power through that homework and you're looking for more, if you scroll to the end of the show notes, you'll find a list of papers and books I sourced to write this episode, so you may find something of interest there as well. That list may also be pinned in the comments below. It just depends on how much room I have in the show notes. So that's it for this episode. It was a lot of information today, and we've only really just scratched the surface of the nervous system. But hopefully you're starting to build a foundation from which we can get deeper into the physiological mechanisms that keep our bodies in balance. Again, please check out the STEM organizations in the show notes and support them or others in any way that you are able. I have no relationship with these organizations. I'm just a fan of the work they're doing, and I hope you will be too. If you learned anything or liked this episode, please click the like and subscribe buttons and the notification bell if you haven't already. Please share it with your friends, neighbors, family, and anyone who you think would benefit from understanding their body a little better. Until next time, take care out there.